In the early future, an outbreak happens, and over 6 billion are infected by this deadly virus. It is spread through bites, and just like rabies, it turns them extremely violent within 90 seconds after being bitten. The remaining humans live underground. At the same time, this group of military and medical team is desperately looking for a cure. One way is to get their hands on the first ever patient and examine it. Hello, welcome back to I Am Movies. Today we're looking into the 2018 British-American science fiction horror film called Patient Zero. But before we jump into the details, make sure to show us some love by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Now let's get right into it. The movie begins with Morgan, the only human to have ever survived being bitten by an infected, and has also developed the ability to communicate with them. His friend Scooter, one of the scientists, wakes him up to start their day. Meanwhile, in the lab, scientists are now working to find a cure for this deadly virus as they frantically search for the first infected person known as Patient Zero, hoping that from his blood, they can engineer a vaccine for the virus. In this quest, we meet Gina, a virologist who is in charge of the development of the vaccine. At the same time, Morgan prepares to interrogate a recently captured infected named Joe Cocker. Soldiers secure Joe Cocker to a chair, and Morgan decides first to play music since it bothers them. After a while, Morgan signals for the music to be paused, and he begins to interrogate Joe Cocker. First, Morgan asks where he's from, and Joe Cocker surprisingly cooperates, revealing that he's from Minnesota and that he was infected toward the end of October of the previous year. With this information, Morgan realizes that Joe Cocker is one of the earliest infected since the date of his infection is closer to the day of the outbreak. Joe Cocker also reveals that he was captured by soldiers from a pack of about 250 infected, which Morgan finds unusual, stating that infected do not normally move in large numbers. Soon, Morgan begins to gain Joe Cocker's trust, letting him know that they are working hard to help them find a cure for the virus. However, Colonel Knox, the soldier in charge of protecting the lab, interrupts the interrogation as he speaks loudly through a mic, asking what they've been talking about. This prompts Joe Cocker to get violent again, and Morgan angrily storms out of the interrogation booth, blaming Colonel Knox for interrupting his interrogation. Soon, Colonel Knox tries to order Morgan to get back into the box, but Gina warns Colonel Knox to be careful. Feeling disrespected, Colonel Knox storms into the booth and shoots Joe Cocker in the head. Morgan angrily grabs the colonel, stating that Joe Cocker might have been linked to Patient Zero since he's one of the earliest infected that came out of Minnesota. However, Colonel Knox threatens Morgan with his gun and pushes him away. After this, Gina once again warns Colonel Knox to be careful, stating that she'll get him stripped of his rank if he steps out of place again. Shortly after the altercation, Gina goes to check on Morgan in the washroom to see if he's fine, but he just keeps talking about how much he misses Janet, his wife, who is being kept with other infected. After checking Morgan's pulse, she confirms he's okay, and they soon become intimate. Shortly after that, Colonel Knox confronts Gina, asking her why she's chosen to take sides with Morgan. However, Gina soon realizes that Colonel Knox is actually attracted to her. Despite this realization, she firmly rejects his advances, making it clear that she has no interest in being with him, even if he's the last man alive. Later that day, Morgan visits Janet where she's been held to offer her an experimental treatment derived from his own blood. The next day, they bring another infected named Pete Townsend into the interrogation box and begin to secure him in place. However, Pete manages to cut loose and soon begins to attack the soldiers. Scooter rushes into the box to help them, but he gets bitten by Pete. The soldiers manage to get Pete off Scooter as they attempt to save him, as it only takes 90 seconds for a person to turn rabid. Immediately, Gina cuts off Scooter's infected hands, and they begin to wrap it up as they count down from 90. After the countdown, Scooter seems fine, and they begin to celebrate their success. Shortly after, Scooter goes into shock, and they soon begin to suspect that the virus already got into his system. But Colonel Knox wastes no time putting a bullet through it. The next day, as Morgan steps into the box to interrogate Pete, Gina warns him to be careful not to base the interrogation on Scooter's death, stating that all he needs to ask is his date of infection, place of infection, and the location of Patient Zero. However, Pete refuses to answer any of Morgan's questions, so Morgan decides to torture him with music. After that, Pete begins to reveal that he was born in Minnesota and was bitten in October of the previous year. However, Pete refuses to give up the location of Patient Zero, whom he refers to as the original. Subsequently, Morgan pulls a gun on Pete to threaten him as he continues to ask where Patient Zero is. Gina begins to warn him not to pull the trigger, and Morgan soon steps out of the box after realizing that Pete isn't scared of dying. As the day progresses, Morgan and Gina present themselves before General Pierce to provide a comprehensive report on their ongoing research. They also propose bringing in more infected individuals to aid in their relentless pursuit of Patient Zero. However, Colonel Knox opposes this suggestion, expressing concerns about risking additional soldiers on their mission. He dismisses the plan to create a vaccine with Patient Zero's blood, deeming it unworthy. However, Gina and Morgan's convincing arguments lead General Pierce to command Colonel Knox to deploy soldiers for a thorough sweep of the area, supporting the duo's efforts to unravel the mysteries surrounding the virus and locate Patient Zero. That night, Morgan visits Janet's cell, telling her how dangerous it is outside. However, Janet begins to him that she can sense that he has been having an affair with Gina. After a moment of tension, Janet pleads with Morgan to release her, insisting that she prefers freedom beyond the confines of the cell. Despite her plea, Morgan reassures her, promising to dedicate himself to finding a cure for her. The next day, Gina tells Morgan that they are making progress with the vaccine they derived from his blood. But the vaccine is temporary, as it only lasted 5 minutes when tested on an infected lab rat. Meanwhile, Gina soon realizes she's now pregnant for Morgan, but she decides to keep it a secret. At the same time, Morgan reflects on the day he and Janet got bitten by infecteds, and later wakes up from the nightmare. The following day, Colonel Knox and some other soldiers begin to cremate the bodies of fallen soldiers. However, one of them suddenly begins to attack the soldiers and soon goes into hiding. Colonel Knox manages to grab a gun as he begins to look for him. Shortly after, the infected attacks Colonel Knox, and they both begin to fight. Morgan soon arrives, and he quickly subdues the infected, who then asks to speak with him. Soon, they secure the infected in the box as Morgan prepares to interrogate him. As per routine, Morgan plays music as usual, but he's surprised to see that he's unaffected by the music. To add to their surprise, the infected pulls out a cigarette and begins to smoke. Now, from the ID found on him, they realize he was once a professor at a university. Morgan stops the music and steps in to begin his interrogation. Morgan soon realizes that the professor is totally different and more advanced than the other infecteds he has ever encountered, as the professor begins to debate with him on who's more evolved between humans and infecteds. Shortly after, Morgan asks the professor how he got infected, and the professor reveals that the school where he was teaching got attacked by infecteds, and as he tried to escape, one of them bit him, adding that he went home just after being infected to see his family, but ends up murdering his own wife and daughter. After going back and forth, Morgan realized that the professor must have been used in tracking their location or probably transmitting a signal. So, Morgan requests for a frequency detector and soon begins to scan the professor, but he can't find anything. Then he rushes down to the cell to confront Pete about it, threatening to torture him till he speaks, but Pete smashes his own head against the wall and commits suicide. However, Morgan scans his body and finds a tracker sewn into it. Morgan immediately destroys the tracker, and later shows it to General Pierce, stating that the infected are now smart and strategically advanced. At the same time, Colonel Knox receives a call that the new body bags are on their way, but General Pierce orders for a lockdown, stating that no one comes in or goes out of the facility. However, the infecteds find their way into the facility, and they soon begin to attack the people as soldiers begin to take shots at them. Soon, the infecteds in the cells get released, and everyone begins to run for their life as the infected violently kill everyone possible. Realizing that the security of the base has been breached, Morgan rushes over to the cell to get Janet out. Shortly after, the control room gets attacked, and Gina manages to escape into an elevator alongside Colonel Knox. However, they soon realize that General Pierce had also managed to escape, but as Gina waits for General Pierce, Colonel Knox selfishly shoots him in the leg to buy time for himself. Horrified by his action, Gina angrily calls him a coward, and later steals his gun from him as she attempts to go back to the lab to get her research work. However, Colonel Knox tries to stop her, and she shoots him during the scuffle. In the cell, Morgan tries to convince Janet to come with him, but she refuses. After a while, she finally agrees to go with him. However, they soon come across Gina, who pulls her gun on Janet, but Morgan convinces her that Janet is now fine, stating that he's not leaving without her. Gina agrees, and they join her to retrieve her research from the lab. Seeing the swarm of infecteds, they decide to crawl through the vents. As they begin to crawl, one of the vents covers drops down, and the infecteds notice them. Shortly after, they get attacked by the infected lab rat, but Janet kills it with her bare hands. Soon, the infecteds begin to pursue them in the vent, and it soon breaks, causing Morgan to hang in the air. However, Gina manages to save him, and they eventually escape from the vent. However, on their way out, the professor confronts them and explains to them that he can't let Morgan leave. With this, Morgan realizes that the infecteds came to the base specifically for him, and the professor further explains to him that Morgan is their Patient Zero, and that he's a threat to their existence. With this, Morgan launches an attack on the professor, and Janet also joins in the fight. but the professor seems stronger. However, as they continue to fight, Morgan manages to push himself and the professor into a sharp pipe, causing the professor to call out to other infecteds. Then the three of them decide to run away, but seeing the swarm of infected, Janet decides to stay to buy them time, telling Morgan that he must leave to save the baby as she has sensed that Gina is now pregnant. Shortly after that, Janet closes the door against herself to face the horde as she whispers to Morgan through the glass pane, saying, "I love you." Morgan and Gina manage to follow the tunnel out to the woods and quietly find a motorcycle. Shortly after, they ride off into the night as the infected run after them, but Morgan is determined to save the human race at all cost, and the movie ends here. If you'd like to see us recap any other movies or topics you have in mind, just drop a comment and let us know. And don't forget to hit the like button, share this recap, and subscribe to stay updated for the next one. Until next time.